It's really a great pleasure to introduce Ed Gerjuoy. It's not often at my age that I can say I'm introducing someone and I hope when I grow up I will be like him. Actually, today, maybe some of you know, I heard it on the radio, it's the 91st anniversary of the end of the First World War. Well, Ed was there, not at the war, but he was listening to the celebrations, I'm sure, in New York. He, after being born in New York, at the same year, apparently very close to when Schwinger and Feynman were born, and not very far in distance, Ed entered City College at the age of 15 in 1933 and graduated in 1937. He was telling me it was not easy to find a job in 1937, even as a busboy or a dishwasher. Anyway, he decided to get over to Berkeley, California, and ended up there being a student of Robert Oppenheimer. Then, from there on, he did many different things in science. I think notably so in 1975 or 77, Ed went and got himself a lawyer's degree, a degree in law, and so he is now not just professor emeritus, but a lawyer emeritus also, but not just emeritus. Ed has been throughout his career very active proponent of many good causes for human rights, the environment, and other things. It's a pleasure to have you here, Ed. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Joe.
Oh, should mention just one thing. Whoever is interested, we are going to go out for dinner at 6:30 in Pitari's Tavern on Woodbridge Avenue, right in New Brunswick. No, in the park, rather.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It really is. I have a number of old friends. When I say old, I mean old. And it's a good opportunity to come back here and talk to them. Now, let me say about this talk, I'll say a few things with introduction. First of all, this talk, the genesis of this talk, was actually in 2004, April 22nd, 2004, was the 100th anniversary of Oppenheimer's birth. And so in June of 2004, there was a 2-day symposium in Los Alamos celebrating his career. And as a former student of Oppenheimer's, I mean, they looked around for someone to describe what being a student of Oppenheimer's would be like. And I was about the only one left who could both walk and talk. So I spoke on it, and that subject. I prepared a half-hour talk, actually, which was been published in the proceedings of that symposium. Now, I also wrote a summary of my symposium talk that appeared in the November 2004 back page of the APS News. Some of you may remember. Anyway, that back page article, along with some other publicity, got me a number of invitations. I've had invitations ever since to repeat that symposium talk. But I didn't want to expand that talk to a full hour, as most colloquia are. So I decided to spend the second half of the talk recalling some facets of the career of Julian Schwinger, who died in who died at the age of 70 or over in 1994, and who happened to serve as Oppenheimer's postdoc during the 1940 academic year when I was still an Oppenheimer graduate student. So that means that. And now let me say also that I've put down on the table here 2 sheets containing books about both Schwinger and Oppenheimer. For those of you who are interested, I may refer to some of them, and for those of you interested, just pick them up, and if they run out, I've given a copy of each sheet to Professor Leibowitz, who will be able to make copies for you. Okay, now, to set the stage, and let you know who I'm talking about, that's what Oppenheimer looked like when I knew him and was at Los Alamos. There are many photographs of him show him wearing his pork pie hat. This doesn't. But what this does not show, which is really a memorable feature of his, he had piercing blue eyes, which really struck me when you saw him. People in New York all commented about it. Now, I want to give you a brief summary of his career, of his life. He was born and grew up in Manhattan, New York City. His parents were Jewish immigrants from Germany. They were very prosperous but not rich. Now, by all accounts, he was very precocious as a child, and he soaked up information like a sponge. And his remarkable ability to absorb new information was demonstrated at Harvard. He completed the normal four-year degree at Harvard in 3 years. That's because he got sick when he was going to enter Harvard, and he spent a year out of school. And then when he came back, he wanted to graduate with those colleagues of his, those fellow graduate students, fellow students who would graduate from his high school at the same time. So anyway, the normal semester load at Harvard was 5 courses. He took 6 courses for credit, and then he ordered other courses as well. In 1 year, he took for credit 4 chemistry classes, 2 in French literature, 2 in mathematics, 1 in philosophy, and 3 more in physics. And he ordered some courses as well. And despite this, he graduated summa cum laude. This means he had essentially a straight A average, and as you know, this meant that was before we had grade inflation. Now, he did not originally intend to be a physicist. When he enrolled at Harvard, he said he wanted to be a mining engineer. But his letters, which have been collected, his letters during his early years at Harvard strongly suggest he was primarily interested in becoming a writer. And he continually offered his friends copies of stories and poetry he had written. But nevertheless, he graduated from Harvard as a chemistry major. But by the time he graduated, he decided to become a physicist, but not a theoretical physicist, an experimental physicist. And in fact, he began his graduate studies at Cambridge, England, doing experimental work, unsuccessfully, I would say, under J.J. Thomson. But eventually he decided to be a theoretical physicist, and he found his way to Göttingen, where he received his PhD in 1927 as a student of Max Born. And then once he began to do research in theoretical physics, his productivity was astonishing. He published 4 papers in 1926, when he was only 22 years old, and he published 5 papers in 1927. And he began his career as a physics professor in 1929 with a joint appointment at Caltech and at the Berkeley campus of the University of California. He was professor at both. But after a few years, he taught at Caltech only in the summer, while spending the remaining months of the academic year at Berkeley. And he functioned as a full-time academic, teaching courses, directing graduate students, until the closing months of 1941, when actually definitely before Pearl Harbor, he began working on problems related to nuclear weapons. And then in early 1943, he went to Los Alamos as laboratory director, as you all know, and everybody agrees he was an absolutely outstanding director, to everybody's surprise, except maybe to him. Then in 1945, after the atomic bomb had been dropped and the war ended, he returned to his professorship at Berkeley for 2 years, and then he left to become director of the Institute of Advanced Study at Princeton, which was his last employment. Now, I should tell you that although he had been a prolific researcher before the war, he essentially ceased personally doing research once he went to Los Alamos. So that's no surprise after it was directed there. But then he published only 4 papers, all with collaborators, after 1945. His last research paper was published in 1950. Now, during the years 1945 to 54, he was almost a folk hero, as well as one of the government's principal advisors, maybe the principal advisor, on nuclear weapons policies. And then in 1954, the Atomic Energy Commission stripped him of his security clearance after a widely publicized hearing, wherein he was accused of associating with communists. And this ended his role as a government advisor, and to his very great address, it's generally agreed. Now, I want to mention here the hardly well-known fact that during his hearing, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, regularly listened in on Oppenheimer's conversations with his lawyers and reported them to the AEC. Now, the transcript of the hearing has been published in a book. It's 1,000 pages long, referred to there in very small type. And if you want to read, if you want a picture of government paranoia during the United States McCarthy era, that's a good book to read. And I also list a quite recently published book by a man named Wolverton, which discusses the hearing's unfairness, but also describes Oppenheimer's activity during the years after he lost his clearance and before his death, in which he was very unhappy in many ways, which was active. Now, Raymond Burge, who chaired the Berkeley Physics Department during Oppenheimer's tenure, has written that Oppenheimer was very absent-minded. He wrote this in a book of the history of the Berkeley Physics Department, which some people have seen. A lot of people have seen it. I've seen it. Now, it's inconceivable to me that the successful director of the Los Alamos Laboratory could have been absent-minded. And I myself never observed any absent-mindedness in him. But Burge does have some evidence on his side. Let me show you the evidence. This is from the Oakland Tribune of February 14th, 1934. It's a front-page story. It was also a front-page story in the San Francisco Chronicle. And Berkeley students were still giggling over this when I got there. And a good friend of mine had actually grew up in San Francisco, so he gave me a copy of this, which I kept. And if you can't see it, the thing begins. The title could read, the title for the most absent-minded professor in the world goes without question to J. Robert Oppenheimer, 30, physics prof at the University of California. And what happened is this. He took Belva Phillips, who had been a student of his, but already had a PhD, so you can't say that was somehow improper. He took her up into the hills for a night in the car, who knows what. Anyway, at some point he excused himself to take care of a need of nature, supposedly, and he got out, and he never came back. And so she sat there for quite a while, really not knowing what to do. And then it was sort of in the park area, one of the cops came along, and she told him, he stopped off, and they looked for Oppenheimer, and they couldn't find him. They looked, and finally they thought to call his home, and he had gone to sleep. He had walked home, gone to sleep. He'd completely forgotten about it. So that was what he had done. Anyway, there's no record of whether Belva Phillips ever again let Oppenheimer take her out. Now, my own personal Oppenheimer recollections, to which I now turn, they're confined to the period from August 1938 to January 1942, which was the period when I was a graduate student at Berkeley. But for complicated reasons I won't go into here, I was one of the few PhDs he produced who didn't work with him on the Manhattan Project. So I went to Berkeley to work with Oppenheimer at the suggestion of Mark Zemansky, who was my favorite instructor at New York City College, where I did my undergraduate studies, as was mentioned. Anyway, as Zemansky worked to go to graduate school to do research on quantum theory, at that time it was still a young subject, it had only been started in 1925. As Zemansky instantly recommended Oppenheimer's group to Berkeley, and since my most pressing need at the time was to get as far away from my family in New York as I could, I went to Berkeley. Without thought, I went to Berkeley. Anyway, when I arrived in Berkeley, I knew nothing about Oppenheimer beyond his name. But I immediately became well acquainted with him. He taught the introductory quantum mechanics course, which I took in my first semester at Berkeley. Then I took an electromagnetic theory course in the second semester. In succeeding years, I took his advanced quantum mechanics and field theory courses. And now, in my experience, his courses were really well taught. He was always well prepared. And that was a marked contrast to some of the other people at Berkeley, one of which in particular was Nobel laureate Ernest Lawrence, who for an entire semester, he floundered through a course in electrostatics, which I had to take at 8 a.m. in the morning, so I was triply resentful. Anyway, one problem with Oppenheimer was he lectured very fast, and I really mean fast. So all I could do was take as many notes as possible and then work my way through those notes right away, because if I didn't do that, I just would not know what he had done. So I learned a lot, I really did, but I had to work very hard. Now, Oppenheimer, he lectured at a prodigious clip, as I've said, but he would take questions, which he generally would answer. But he also could be impatient. And if the question was manifestly stupid or the student didn't quite get the answer right away, he could get quite caustic. And his answers, unfortunately, were not often illuminating. And if he had a fault, and it's a teaching fault or another fault, my analysis, which other people may not agree with, but my analysis is that he simply lacked empathy. I don't feel that he was deliberately unkind in some of the things he did. He just did not understand how other people were reacting to him. And, you know, that's a gift that some people don't have, and he didn't seem to have it. And if you, as I say, if you persisted after receiving his initially patient answer, you could be on the receiving end of some very caustic sort of sarcasm. Now, what I haven't yet mentioned was the most distinctive feature of his lectures, and that was his chain smoking. He spoke quite rapidly, I've said, and he puffed equally rapidly. And he carried a cigarette, visually, had a cigarette in one hand and the chalk in the other. And when the cigarette burned down to a fragment he could no longer hold, he had a marvelous trick, which I can't reproduce. Somehow or other, this one cigarette lit another cigarette, and the next instant he had the second cigarette in the hand, he was still writing. And anyway, I can still visualize him. And the way I visualize him, he was on the blackboard, one cigarette in one hand, chalk in the other hand, and his head wreathed in a cloud of smoke. And so it's no surprise. He died in 1967 at the age of 62 from throat cancer. That's what he died of. Now, what I ask you, you can think about, is whether the fact that I'm here today is evidence that the health risks of secondhand smoke have been overrated. Now, my classroom recollections of Oppenheimer, which I've just encapsulated for you, are actually considerably less vivid than the recollections stemming from my attendance at his weekly theoretical seminar that he ran. Now, I joined Oppenheimer's group, meaning his group is his students and his research associate, now what we call the postdoc. And roughly the spring of '39 is when I joined. And joining the group was not a big deal. As I recall, I told Oppenheimer I was interested in obtaining my PhD under his direction, and he said, very well, we could see what I could do. And he didn't immediately give me a research problem. I didn't expect him to. I hadn't even been to Berkeley 2 semesters. I hadn't taken this advanced quantum mechanics course yet. But all it required of me, like all of the other students in this group, was seeing to it that I regularly showed up at his seminar. And now one of the first things I learned from attending his seminar was he didn't mind being called Oppenheimer. He was really, despite what I've indicated about him, he was really didn't put on airs. And so I called him Oppie, and I was probably speaking, I certainly think of him as Oppie. I'll probably call him Oppie for the rest of this talk. Anyway, the number of students in his group deserves some special attention. He joined the Berkeley faculty in the fall of 1929. He remained at Berkeley till the summer of '42. You know what, you give him a leave of absence to work on, you know what. Now, of the 24 students who earned their PhDs under his supervision during this 13-year period, 16 received their degrees between 39 and 43. And I recall, by the way, that every one of these 16 already was a fellow graduate student of mine by the fall of 1940 when I published my first paper. So, recognizing there were a few, not very many, a few students of Oppie's who never received their PhDs, the facts I've just recited imply, during every one of the years I was at Berkeley, he was a PhD thesis advisor of between 15 and 20 students, of whom a very large fraction eventually earned their PhD degrees. Now that's, I think, a pretty remarkable statistic. I think even in the most halcyon days United States physics departments have enjoyed since World War II, with would-be theorists flocking all over, I doubt there have been more than a handful of professors who at any one time supervised as many successful theoretical physics PhD students as Oppie did. And a good many of those PhDs went on to distinguished careers as physicists or physics educators. And this category includes Willis Lamb, Nobel Prize, although not in theoretical physics, Philip Morrison, and David Bohm. I'm listing only names here that everyone in this audience will recognize. And now returning to his seminar, Its regular attendees primarily were Oppie students and his research associate, postdoc, as well as Oppie himself, of course. And there were other more or less regular attendees during my years at Berkeley. Of these attendees, the most noteworthy was Stanford Professor Felix Bloch. He was just about Oppie's age, who once a month would drive in from Palo Alto with a few of his students. And I wanted you to realize that that was quite a compliment to Oppie right there, because when I got to Berkeley, there still was no bridge. I mean, you had to actually drive a long way around the bay in order to get to Berkeley from Stanford, and that's what he did. And now the seminar was Oppie's domain. It was his fiefdom. His behavior in this seminar displayed the same lack of empathy I just mentioned. He rarely gave a talk himself. He preferred instead to sit in the front row and interrupt the speaker with questions, no matter who they were, without any consideration how they reacted to the questioning. And I remember quite well that several times he reduced Leonard Schiff, who was Oppie's postdoc during most of the time I was a member of the group. He reduced him almost to tears. He really did. And so Oppie's students, including me, we had no real appreciation of Schiff's talents. Certainly I couldn't have expected that Schiff would have a distinguished career, including being a member of the National Academy and chair of the Stanford Physics Department. Now, another habit of Oppie's in his seminar was to answer someone else's question before the speaker could answer it. Or, not infrequently, and I mean this, he would jump up and take over the blackboard while the speaker still was in the middle of his talk. And Felix Bloch frequently suffered these rude treatments. And so we students in Oppie's group, we took notice of Bloch's willingness to accept such interruptions. We were fond of saying Bloch was Oppie's most advanced student. And I remember how surprised I was to discover, well after I received my PhD and started teaching, that he was a famous physicist in his own right. He later received a Nobel Prize. Now, he reportedly, I'm just saying, he continued his nomination of seminars at the Institute for Advanced Study. Jeremy Bernstein, in his Oppenheimer biography, writes that when Dyson came to the Institute to talk about his work, which is showing the identity of the Schwinger and Feynman formulations of QED, that was before that work had been published, and I'm now quoting from Bernstein. Dyson got the treatment. He was scheduled to give 5 lectures, but in the first 2, Oppenheimer would not let him talk. He reduced him to silence. And as a matter of fact, Dyson left, and then he went back to Cornell, and apparently it was only after receiving a very stern letter from Beta that Oppie restrained himself and allowed Dyson to come back and describe his work. And as you know, Dyson actually ended up at the Institute. Now, I hardly have to tell you here, a speaker is real if not pleased to have someone in his or her audience take over the speaker's role the way Oppie did. So, as I say, I think it's illustrative of his lack of empathy. And what I want to stress is, I don't think he was doing this because he ran the seminar. It was his seminar. And as an evidence of this, I want to read you what Max Born, who was a 1954 Nobel laureate for the work in quantum mechanics that he did. Max Born wrote the following about Oppie's behavior in Born's seminar when Oppie still was Born's graduate student. I'm going to quote again. But as you listen to what I'm about to read, please remember, Born is writing about pre-World War II Germany, where a student was expected to revere with worship his house professor. That's what it was like there. Anyway, here are Born words in a biography of his, which was published after his death. Oppenheimer was a man of great talent. He was conscious of his superiority in a way which was embarrassing and led to trouble. In my ordinary seminar in quantum mechanics, he used to interrupt the speaker, whoever it was, not excluding myself, and to step to the blackboard, taking the chalk and declaring, this can be done much better in the following manner. I felt the other members did not like these personal interruptions and corrections. After a while, they complained. But I, Born speaking, I was a little afraid of Oppenheimer. My half-hearted attempts to stop him were unsuccessful. At last, I received a written appeal. The students gave me a sheet of paper looking like parchment in the style of a medieval document, containing the threat, that they would boycott the seminar unless the interruptions were stopped. I did not know what to do. At last, I decided to put the document on my desk in such a way that Oppenheimer could not help seeing it when he came to discuss the progress of his thesis with me. This plot worked. That concludes all I want to say about Oppenheimer, really, except to remark that Oppenheimer is enduringly famous, and as many of you already know, I'm sure, very recently an opera has been written called Dr. Atomic, in which he is the principal character, and this opera was performed in fall 2008 at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. And the opera performance was filmed and shown in some 300 movie houses worldwide. If you ever get a chance to see it, see it. And so now, unless I'm interrupted by a question, I don't mind being interrupted. I should have told you that. I really don't. I'll turn to Julian Schwinger. Now, first of all, let me show you a photograph of Schwinger. There he is. This is Julian Schwinger at Harvard, but it's pretty much the way he looked when I knew him. His hair was turned a little to the side, people have noticed. It was taken about 1960, I think. Now, one of the reasons I'm devoting so much time to Schwinger, and I'm going to, in this talk, is that although Schwinger won a Nobel Prize, and he died in 1994 at age 76, I told you, and he certainly was a genius, as I'll elaborate. His name hardly was known to the public, and it's rapidly being forgotten, I think, even by physicists. And the contrast with Feynman, whose name remains well known to every physicist, and even to a good part of the public, in this regard, is very striking. So, the next slide illustrates what I've been just saying. This slide illustrates, it's the top portion of a panel, one of a set of panels produced by the APS in 1999 for celebration of the 100 years of physical review. Now, I know we have a copy of this at Pitt, and at most places, is there a copy of this here at Rutgers? Anyway, what I want to notice is that it's a picture, obviously, of Feynman, not of anybody else. And if you can't read the small print on the slide, let me read you what the text says. To the left of this photo. It says, together with American colleagues and Japanese physicists who had worked along similar lines while they were out of touch with the West during the war, Feynman, in caps, solved the problem by creating quantum electrodynamics, QED. Now what I ask is, where's Schwinger's name? Where's his photo? This is a panel officially created by the American Physical Society. They certainly should have known that Feynman shared with Schwinger the 1965 Nobel Prize for the development of QED. And they also should have known that Schwinger performed his calculations explaining the two leading QED experiments, the Lamb shift and the battery electron anomalous magnetic moment. He performed those calculations before Feynman did. And it's true, if you look carefully at the rest of the panel, not shown on the slide, there's a small box in the middle of the panel, about the size of one of those boxes there. And that slide does mention Schwinger. There's no photograph, however. And believe me, it's not easy to find. Now, it's puzzling. And also, as I mentioned earlier, or was mentioned, they were both born in 1918, or about 3 months apart. But Schwinger began to publish far ahead of Feynman. And indeed, he was much more famous than Feynman until about 1955. And in fact, here's what Feynman himself had to say about his first meeting with Julian when they both were 25 years old. And now again, I'm quoting. It was not until I went to Los Alamos that I got a chance to meet Schwinger. He already had a great reputation because he had done so much work. I was very anxious to see what this man was like. I'd always thought he was older than I was because he'd done so much more. At the time, I hadn't done anything. And he came and gave us lectures. I believe they were on nuclear physics. I'm not sure exactly the subject. It was a scene you probably all have seen once. The beauty of one of his lectures. He comes in with his head a little bit to one side. He comes in like a bull into a ring, and he puts his notebook down and he begins. And the beautiful, organized way of putting one idea after the other. Everything very clear from the beginning to the end. I was supposed to be a good lecturer, according to some people. This was really a masterpiece. So I was very impressed, and at times I got them to talk to him, I learned more. So that was fun about Schwinger, and let me now give you a brief summary of Schwinger's career and life as he did with Oppie. Like Oppie and Feynman for that matter, Schwinger was born and brought up in New York City. And again, like Oppie, he was very precocious and he soaked up information. But he manifested his precocity and absorbed information very differently from Oppie. In particular, he very early became focused on physics. And moreover, and this is the point, he learned physics essentially completely on his own, with little or no help from the formal educational system. He began his self-education at a very young age, primarily by reading books in the public library. And he carried it on so effectively that by age 16, when he graduated from high school, he was doing publishable calculations. By this time, he already had begun, although apparently it was not completely, but he eventually worked only at night, about which I'll say more later. Now, according to Schwinger's close friend, physicist David Saxon, Schwinger once remarked, I'm quoting again, that he began reading through the Encyclopedia Britannica at a very early age. When it came to the letter P, that was it. Now, Schwinger himself, in autobiographical material submitted to the Nobel Foundation, he wrote, "The principal direction of my life was fixed at an early age by an intense awareness of physics. Its study became all-engrossing activity." And so, as Schweber puts it in his biography, Schwinger's precocity and genius made him a living legend even while in high school. Now, Schweber writes more about Schwinger and lists that book by Schweber on his sources. He tells the following story about Schwinger's precocity, and again I'm quoting. Apparently, Schwinger's high school physics teacher, Irving Lowen, who at the time was trying to complete a theoretical physics PhD thesis at New York University, had come across this kid in quotes, sitting in the library, reading the physical review, in fact, reading a paper by Dirac. So Lowen thought, well, here's another one of these smart aleck kids that we get every once in a while. So Lowen quizzed Schwinger about what he had been reading. And Schwinger allegedly was not only capable of telling him what he was reading, but also told him what needed to be done to complete what Dirac hadn't completed in this particular paper. Now, the story may be apocryphal, but it does seem to be the case that Lowen was so impressed, he introduced Schwinger to his PhD professor, Otto Halpern. And Schwinger began working with Halpern. And that culminated in Schwinger's first published paper, jointly with Halpern in the 1935 Phys when Schwinger was only 17 years old. And also, through Lowen and Halpern, Schwinger became known to a number of other physicists in the New York City area, with whom and for whom began doing calculations. And I first met Julian in 1934, shortly after Julian entered CCNY. We met when we both took intermediate mechanics, on the first course of mechanics after elementary physics. I'd never heard of Julian before. Now, I'll want to say the following. Everybody but the course instructor was a drudge named Shay. The thing about City College was the student body was wonderful, and the faculty, except for a few exceptions like Zemansky, was terrible. I mean, they were way inferior to the students. Anyway, everybody but the course instructor, Shay, immediately recognized Julian as another species. Now, most of us, including me, we had just learned how to take vector products. Schwinger was performing manipulations like making integrals vanish, doing the divergence theorem. It was just, so anyway, I can now tell you my main claim to fame. Here's my main claim to fame. At the end of that semester, I got an A and Schwinger only got a B. Now, why did he only get a B? Because he was working at night, he hardly ever came to class except to take the exams, which of course he was able to pass. But Shay just disliked him, but he couldn't give him a really bad grade because Julian's exams were good, so he gave him a B. Now, what I'd like you to understand was that at the time, the CCNY curriculum had a huge, and I mean huge, number of required courses outside the major. I took required 4 semesters of public speaking, a semester of ancient history, a semester of modern history, a semester of economics, 4 semesters of English literature, a year of chemistry, a year of biology, a semester of engineering, drafting, etc., etc. Now, Julian hardly ever came to class, and he couldn't pass the exams in history and so on without coming to class. So in math and physics was okay. So by the summer of 1935, Schwinger essentially was flunking out of CCNY. And this is true. But his disaster came just about when this paper with Halper on the polarization of electron by double scattering was published. And he also was in the process of completing his second paper on the beta radioactivity of neutrons with Lloyd Motz, which was published in the 35 Physical Review. Now, Motz was an instructor at City College and a PhD student of Robbie's at Columbia. And Robbie has written how Schwinger happened to be brought to his attention. This is now Robbie writing, more quoting. There was this paper of Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, and I was reading it. One of my ways of trying to understand something was to call him a student, explain it to him, and then argue about it. In this case, it was Lloyd Motz, who was also at that time, I think, an instructor or something at City College, and I called him in, and he said there was somebody waiting for him outside. So I said, call him in. So we called him in, and there was a young boy who came in. So I asked him to sit down, and we continued, and at one point there was a bit of an impasse, and then this kid spoke up and used the completeness theorem to settle the argument. So I was startled. What's this? What's this? So then I wanted to talk to him, which I did. It turned out I was told he was having difficulty at City College. Well, I knew the people he was having difficulty with. It's an honorable thing to have difficulty with those people. So I suggested transferring to Columbia, and I got a transfer from City College, and I took it to one of the officials, I can't remember who it was. Now, what about a scholarship for this guy, I said. Anyway, he looked at the transcript and said, on the basis of this, he wouldn't even admit him. So I then said something very tactless. I said, suppose he were a football player. The problem remained, but somewhere or other, I managed to override him and he was admitted. And that's what happened. Schwinger was rescued and brought to Columbia and the Robbie, otherwise I don't know what would have happened to him. Anyway, at Columbia, he was permitted to take whatever course he liked. He got his Bachelor of Science in 1936. By that time, he'd already done enough work to warrant a PhD, and he continued his research as a student of Robbie's until he was actually awarded a PhD in 1939 at the age of 21. And once he got to Columbia and was freed from the City College constraints of taking all those required courses, his creativity burst forth. He had no publications in 1936, but here's a list of his publications in 1937. So this is what he published. All the papers are non-trivial. Several are quite important. The fourth is scattering amplitudes. The first paper is Julian's solo flight, and in it, he corrects an expression for the magnetic scattering of neutrons derived by Bloch. And he had no hesitation about stating in print, although he was 19 years old and Bloch was a professor at Stanford, he had no hesitation about saying in print that Bloch had made a mistake. And he was right, because the paper's referee happened to be Hans Weber, and he emphasized that in his review of the paper, as his note. Okay, and I want to remind you, all these publications were accomplished by Julian on his own. He was self-taught. He had to be self-taught, but he never attended classes. All right, now, Schwinger came to Berkeley in the fall of '39 after receiving his PhD. He replaced Schiff as Appie's research associate. Now, essentially, all the students in Appie's group knew nothing about Schwinger. They were eagerly anticipating Julian's first seminar. They were wondering how long it would take Julian to shrivel at Appie's question. Now, I, on the other hand, I had friends at Columbia, and not only knew what told me how Schwinger was performing for Robbie, I was wondering how Appie would react to Julian's refusal to shrivel. And indeed, Julian's first seminar went exactly as I anticipated. Appie asked him a question, and Julian answered. Appie asked him another question, Julian answered. He asked him 10 questions, Julian answered. He wasn't even breathing hard. Anyway, Oppie then stopped, and as far as I can recall, he never afterward unduly interrupted Julian with questions. Now, Robbie tells, again, in his biography, he relates that Oppie initially was terribly disappointed with Schwinger. He disliked Julian's habit of working at night, and he even thought of asking Julian to go elsewhere. But Robbie dissuaded him, and he soon learned to respect Julian. In fact, they wrote 2 papers together. Now, when Julian arrived in Berkeley, mine was one of the very few faces he recognized, and we were also about the same age, born a few months apart, so we became good friends, much better friends than we'd been at City College. I hardly saw him. And actually, I must say, although he certainly taught me a lot of physics, I taught him a few things. For instance, I taught him to play pool. But anyway, about a year after he arrived at Berkeley, we started working together on a problem, which eventually became one of the publications that constituted my PhD thesis. Now, I'll tell you, in a moment, I'll tell you a bit more about the problem. But first let me describe what working with Julian was like. I had to accommodate the Julian schedule, obviously. And now, some days Julian got up earlier. For instance, he came to Oppie's seminar, which was in the late afternoon. But most of the time, as I said, he didn't get up until late at night. And so, here's what it was like. I'm just now telling you what I recall. I would regularly, when I was working with Julian, at 11:45 p.m., I would meet him at the Berkeley Campus International House, where he was staying. And then we drive to some all-night bistro Julian had found, where Julian had breakfast. Then we went back to LeConte Hall, which was a physics department building. We worked for 3 hours. Then we went to some other bistro, and Julian had lunch. Then we went back to LeConte Hall until 8 a.m. I had to leave to attend courses, to be a teaching assistant, and, in fact, to squeeze in certain husbandly duties, because I just got married. So I must have gotten some sleep that day, but I sure can't remember it. And that really was what it's like. Anyway, let me give you another illustration of Schwinger's awesome talents, which were personally observed by me in very unknown. And this is the story about Bernard Peters and Chaim Richman, 2 PhDs in physics who were Oppenheimer students at the time. About 5 p.m. one afternoon, I and Julian and Oppie were in Oppie's office. I think I did not mention that Oppie was very free to let students come into his office because he had a lot of books there which were not available in the physics library, and you could use them. For instance, there was a book by Promise in quantum mechanics in German. So I was in there, and in came Richman and Peters. And Richman and Peters, they were together, they told Oppie that they would like to have a problem to work on together. So Oppie thought a little bit, and he said, well, why don't you do the cross-section for the electron disintegration of the deuterium? And he explained to them what the idea was. It was an electron, no nuclear forces, but if an fast electron came by the deuteron, the electron had an electric field which was concentrated at its speed, and this electric field, if large enough, would be enough to pull the proton away from the neutron, and that would cause the deuteron to disintegrate. And he sort of worked on that cross-section. And so they listened and so on, and he asked some questions, and out they went. Okay. That evening, this is a true memory, I'm not making it up. That evening at International House, 11:45 p.m., I went, I met Julian as usual. And there was Julian sitting at the desk, Western Union. In those days, they still had a Western Union. He was sitting at his desk, and he was scratching away at those little telegraph blanks, that people wrote telegrams out. And I said, what are you doing? And he says, oh, that was sort of an interesting problem. Oppenheimer mentioned. I'll be through in a minute. And he was just working away at it. No, just working. Okay, and then after a few minutes, he says, okay. And he takes his telegraph blank that he had, and he stuffs it in his pocket like this, remember? We went out to have breakfast and so on and so on. Okay. 6 months later, as it happened, I was in Oppie's office again. Schwing was in Oppie's office again late afternoon, and in came Richman and Peters. They had the cross section. So, here's what it is. So Oppie said, let's see what it looks like. And so they put on the board this thing, which is stretched from one end of the board to the other. You know, I've written down and Oppie looks at it, and he looks at it and he says, well, it looks sort of right. He says, seems to have the right end, it depends on what I expect. Then he says to Julian, didn't you tell me you'd work this out? And Julian says, yeah, let me see. And he starts pulling. And finally he pulls out of his pocket this worn piece of paper that's telling him that, and he can barely smooth it out. He looks at it, and he says, it looks right, he says, but I think you're missing a factor of 2. And Oppenheimer, without any pause, he says to them, find that factor of 2. And so when they came to meeting, they went out like this. And about 4 months later, they said they found the factor of 2. I don't know what they did, and the paper was published. And they both became experimenters. Now, let me return to the problem I worked out with Schwinger. And let me explain how the problem originated. When Robbie made his unexpected discovery that the deuteron had a quadrupole moment, Schwinger realized immediately, and I believe he was the first to do so, that the fact it was a quadrupole moment implied that the nuclear two-body interaction had to have non-central so-called tensor forces. And this conclusion was described by Julian in a 10-minute paper at an APS meeting in early 1939, which appeared essentially simultaneously with the appearance of the Robbie paper announcing the discovery of the deuteron quadrupole moment. Now, all the other calculations of the two-nucleon system, calculations were carried out tediously and painstakingly by Bruck, remember, pounding and adding machine. They all had ignored the tensor force, and so they really had to be redone. And so what Julian wanted to know was whether a velocity-independent local potential could account for all the properties of the two-nucleon system at reasonably low energies up to 10 millivolts. And so what he did, he got Rurita. William Rurita had been an associate professor, I think it was, at Brooklyn College. And every 7 years, Rurita took a sabbatical and he went to work with somebody. And this time he had come to work with Oppenheimer. And he had come there roughly a little bit after, about the same time that Schwinger had come. And he knew Schwinger's reputation from New York, so he got together with Schwinger. And so what Schwinger did, he got Rurita to work on, as I say, could a single potential which would fit the quadrupole moment, could that also explain neutron-proton scattering, the splitting of the deuteron, or the ground state energy in the first excited state within the continuum, and a few other experiments like that. And so Rurita was pounding away on that. And Rurita really was not, I don't want to speak ill to them, but Rurita really was not very strong. And he was worried about Julian writing his paper. And Julian was not very good at writing papers. I mean, really a lot of work which he never wrote up. And so, what happened was that Rurita was getting more and more nervous. And when I came in at night working with Julian, I could hear in the next room, there was Rurita pounding that adding machine and so on. Anyway, and Rurita would keep asking him, well, how about that paper? Oh, I'll get it done, I'll get it done. Anyway, one night we came in, and Rurita was there, and he was actually, Julian was about 5'6", and so was Rurita. Rurita was about twice as broad as Julian. And he sort of muscled Julian to the wall, and he said to him, in a Brooklyn accent, he said, Julian, if you don't get that paper written, I'm going to kill you. Well, in 3 weeks, this famous Rurita Schwinger paper was written with all the stuff in it and about angular momentum and so on, that really famous paper. It got written, and so Rurita left happy and he got promoted. That's what happened. Now, let me tell you now what I was working on. What I was working on was essentially an outgrowth of this work of Rutgers. Because, you know, it became pretty evident, as they say, to Julian, that yes, it would work. You could get a two-body potential which would fit it. But he wanted to know, could you explain three-body systems with that same potential? And so what I was working on was using the same potential which Rutgers sort of approximately gotten, and trying to see whether you could explain hydrogen-3 and helium-3 and the alpha particle bonding energies. And in fact, I found that you couldn't, and that you really would need some other velocity-dependent forces. And in fact, again, Julian wanted me to keep working forever, but I refused to do it. And Julian left Berkeley in, I guess the spring of '41, I forget. But he went and he got a job. He was lucky to get, he would get an instructorship at Purdue's, the only job he could get in those days with Julian. And so he left, and in fact, I didn't write up the paper, but I was able to write it up. I wrote it up. I sent a copy to Julian and told him, I'm going to send it in a month if I don't hear from you. And so he sent me some comment. They sent it in, and that was the third paper, which I mentioned before. It was impressed. Anyway, what I want to tell you about now is what it was like working with Julian in a different sense. See, when I was working with Julian on this problem, we had to calculate a whole bunch of matrix elements. There were probably 100 or more than 100 of this kind. And what was involved was that you had to first, Julian had learned, this is Julian's idea, to write these forces in terms of spin operators. And so what you had to do, you had to first evaluate the spin operators, the expectation value, and then you had to do the angular integrals, and then you came down to a radial integral, which had to be done by hand. And it was my job. But before you could do this, they say, the first thing you had to do before you did the numerical integration, you had to be sure you calculated these spin orbit sums correctly in integrals. And so Julian and I, we agreed that what we would do them separately, and if we agreed, fine. If we didn't agree, we would do them together on the board and get the right answer. And so, as I recall, there were maybe, of the 100, 120 or so, there were maybe 10 to 15 when Julian and I didn't agree. And so we did them on the board, and not once was I right. I know, I was so furious. I'm furious now. Because I don't think I'm part of Julian, but I'm really not a bad physicist. He should have made a mistake once. He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. And so anyway, that was what happened. Now, let me go on and quote in this regard. Let me quote something which was said by Schwinger in his book about Dyson, Feynman. He says, the notes of Schwinger's calculations are extant. They give proof of his awesome computational powers. Starting from the Hamiltonian of the coupled field system, the self-energy terms were identified and a mass renormalization was then performed. What previously had been pieces of the theory became welded and unified into a consistent and coherent quantum electrodynamics to order alpha, the fine structure constant. To obtain the expression from which the Lamb shift can be calculated, lengthy computations involving properties of solutions of the Dirac equation, traces over photon polarizations, integrations over photon energies had to be performed. These were carried out fearlessly and seemingly effortlessly. Schwinger just plowed ahead. Often involved steps were carried out mentally, and the answer was written down. And most important, the lengthy calculations are error-free. And that seems to be that he just did not make errors, that guy. Anyway, he was the first person to realize the same covariant gauge invariant renormalization that account for the Lamb shift would explain the parts of the jar-magnetic ratio of the electron from the I'm not a QED expert, people here can talk more on that. But what I want to say is that a few years after these QED triumphs of Schwinger's, Feynman announced his ability to do the same calculation far more easily via his diagrammatic techniques, and Schwinger's position at the crest of theoretical physics, which was at the crest for about the mid-1950s, began to end. But, for instance, Schweber quotes Oppie as saying, most people solve a problem to show it can be done. Schwinger solves a problem to show that only he can do it. Anyway, Schwinger got a job at Harvard after the war. During the war, he was at the Rad Lab at MIT, where he published some important work having to do with the theory of waveguides and so on. And he got a job at a professorship at Harvard, very early. I think he was the youngest professor Harvard ever hired at that time. And Schwinger has told me, I remained friends with him, that actually Oppenheimer had wanted him to go to Berkeley, but he turned down Oppenheimer to go to Harvard, not realizing that Oppenheimer was already at that time planning to go to the Institute. He was very angry. He really wanted to go to Berkeley otherwise. But he went to Harvard and he stayed there. But he left Harvard for UCLA in 1972, when he was sort of, again, had begun to get out of the main thread of physics. And starting in 1966, he devoted his major research efforts to what is known as source theory, which is a reformulation of QED and other field theories in which you didn't have to be normalized. Schwinger really was bothered by the fact that there were infinities and thought that that was a defect of the theory, but the source theory has other arbitrary features of it, and again, most of the world, there are a few people who followed it. There's somebody at UCLA where he went, named Finkelstein, who has done work on source theory, but for the most part, it's off the main line. And so, anyway, what are likely to be Schwinger's most enduring contributions to physics? And that's what I want to close with. Paul Martin, who wrote a memorial tribute to Schwinger, listed at least 7 theoretical physics areas in which Schwinger made important contributions. Effective range theory, scattering theory, I won't read them all, use of Green's functions. But many physicists, including me, think his most enduring achievements may be his students. Now, I pointed out that Oppie had 24 students who earned PhDs in 13 years. That's a remarkable number. At Harvard, Julian had 68 students who earned their PhDs in 27 years. That's 50% greater than the rate of Oppie's PhD production. And his PhDs include a remarkable number of famous physicists. First of all, 4 of his students are Nobel laureates. Ben Michelson, Shelley Glashow, Walter Cohn, and Roy Glauber all got their PhDs from Schwinger. And others who didn't get Nobel laureates are well known. Kenneth Case, Lowell Brown, Bryce DeWitt, Abraham Klein, Eugen Wurzbacher, Roger Newton, Fritz Royal, all the students of Schwinger's. And in this respect, the contrast with Feynman could not be more striking. Feynman had only a handful of PhD students, none of whom, to my knowledge, was particularly distinguished. I could be wrong about this. But I'll paraphrase and I'll close with what Saxon wrote in his Schwinger overture. He says, even if explicitly mentioning Schwinger's name no longer is fashionable, these PhD students produced by Schwinger, who utterly dwarf Feynman's corresponding production in both number and reputation, they continue to instill Schwinger's techniques and his ways of approaching physics problems into the psyches of new generations of physics students. This is an achievement that well may outlast the impact of both Feynman's and Schwinger's actual publication. Now, close